Hello and welcome back to another episode of Everybody Hates Your Brand, the podcast for all things marketing. And in this episode, we've got a fantastic interview with the email marketing guru himself, Oracle's own Chad White. Email marketing is the tactical bedrock of many a marketing and CRM plan, even after all these years. It's cheap-ish, it's personalizable, it's measurable, and it acts as a direct conduit to your digital world, and with mobiles, your physical world as well. It's long past due for us to talk about it. So today we're extremely lucky to be joined by Chad White. Chad is Head of Research at the Oracle Digital Experience Agency, author of Email Marketing Rules, and contributor at Marketing Profs, CMS Wire, and Contributor. He's worked previously at Litmus, Salesforce, and more. Basically, he is the voice of authority on email today, and I will link to his website and socials in the show notes so you can learn more. Without further ado, let's crack on with the interview. So, as I said in the intro, we are very lucky to be joined by Chad White. Chad, thank you very much for joining me on the Everybody Hates Your Brand podcast.
My pleasure to be here.
So, the way we start any interview, we do what I call the credibility section to explain to our listeners who you are, what you do, your background and career, and what have you. So, would you start us off with just a bit of a summary of who you are and your career to date, please?
Sure. So, I am the head of research at Oracle Digital Experience Agency. It's essentially an agency inside of Oracle. We've got hundreds of digital marketing and communication experts there. We help our Oracle customers really with anything, any kind of problems, anything they want to overcome in the digital marketing and communication space, whether they're looking to build, tighter, stronger relationships with their customers, with their partners, or with their employees. And it's great. My job is sort of dual focused. I help to pull together strong points of view around different issues that are happening in the digital space so that we can make sure that we're all kind of saying the same thing to our various clients. And then I also have a lot of fun, then sharing that out in some form, as part of content marketing efforts, largely to demonstrate to the market that we have really smart people and sharp ideas and can help them with their programs as well. And but kind of going, so that's what I do now. But you talked about sort of like my pedigree. So I started in the world of journalism. I have a master's in journalism from New York University, and I worked at Dow Jones and Condé Nast for a number of years. So that's really my roots. And I was very fortunate through some strange happenstance to kind of fall into the email marketing space. Back when blogs were really nice and shiny, when it was the nice shiny new thing, which it hasn't been for a while. But the story essentially is that my brother started a blog, and being the younger competitive brother, I said, well, if my brother can start a blog, I can start a blog too. And then I started thinking about, what it is that I would blog about. And at that time, I was covering retailers quite aggressively. And one of the things I was doing was I was signing up for all of their email marketing programs. And I was watching, what they were announcing. At that time, the web was still, growing and evolving. And so they were frequently announcing, new web changes and other business things too. And I was using that for leads. And so I was somewhat familiar with email at that time from just seeing all of these campaigns. And I said, what, let me blog about what I'm seeing in my tracking inboxes. And so I started doing that essentially 6 days a week. And I ended up doing that for 6.5 years. So thousands of blog posts about email marketing. And
consistency pays off, as they say.
Yeah. It's like the 10,000 hours rule about becoming an expert. This is sort of like the 10,000 emails rule to becoming an expert. You see enough emails and you really start to figure out hey, what's the crowd wisdom? What's working and what's not? What am I seeing over and over again? And so that's how I got into the email marketing space. And honestly, it's been fantastic. As a journalist, I'm kind of all about the next news story, and email marketing always has the next news story. There's always the next thing. whether it's generative AI, which is all the talk right now, or it was Apple's mail privacy protection or link tracking protection, or all the changes that happened during the pandemic to email marketing and consumer behavior at large, and on and on and on. The new Google and Yahoo deliverability requirements that just went into effect at the beginning of February. Just always change, which again, I delight in. I love the change. I think a lot of email marketers wish that things didn't change as frequently as they did.
Hmm.
I mean, quite a bit of change as of late. But that's the part that I find really fascinating. I think it keeps the channel very fresh, always very relevant. Email marketing is not a stagnant channel. There is always new stuff happening, and by and large, it's all pushing the channel forward in good ways.
Yes, I would agree with that. It's funny because it feels like it's been around forever, and you're right. It has changed in all recognition, and obviously in this part of the world, GDPR was
Mhm.
a fun thing to deal with as well. There's been a lot of that going on. It's interesting that email is the thing that grabbed you. It's a really interesting thing. The email is such a bedrock of most marketing plans, and yet, and you talk about change all the time, and yet every year I see surveys of marketers in the CRM and email space, and every year, increased personalization or increased relevance seems to be at the top of always. It hasn't changed. It seems to be there all the time because it's not, depending on how your data is, not a particularly easy thing to do. In your experience, what is it that is so hard to get right about personalization? Is it poor data? Is it legacy systems? Is it just too much hassle to do it? Do you know what I mean? Like there's a certain sense of like, oh, it's cheap. Why are we going to muck about trying to make this thing even more personalized? Let's just send it. What's your kind of experience in that world in terms of why personalization has seems to be continually on top of the list of things to do?
Yeah, I think it's very easy to interpret that as a failure. You could see like, oh gosh, it's still at the top of the list. That means like they haven't achieved it, right? And it's there again. Clearly, this is something that marketers are struggling with. Um, I think I view it kind of differently. I don't think personalization is a toggle. I don't think it's like this campaign is personalized or it's not. I think it's a slider. And I think the really critical thing to recognize about personalization is not only is it a slider, but it's a slider where the scale has dramatically changed. When I first got into email marketing in a big way, it was the mid 2000s. And at that point, there was probably like a 3 point scale on that slider. It was like, not personalized at all, just everybody gets the same thing. The one spot on that slider was probably that you personalized that subject line with the recipient's name. That was magical back then. That was all the rage. Everyone was so proud of themselves for doing that. And then, like, the final spot in that slider was transactional emails, which had actual details about what you did, the thing you purchased. And that was probably about it. It was a very simple slider. But, today, we're not operating with a 3 point slider. We've got like a 30 point slider, and next year it'll probably be a 32 point slider, and it's, and on and on. So I think that's the way to think about it, is that we have so many more ways to personalize email marketing campaigns. Our sophistication is constantly growing, and the reason why it's always at the top of the list is because we have these growing capabilities, and consumers respond to it. Consumers demand it. I know there's a lot of sort of hand wringing, right now in the industry because of privacy. You mentioned GDPR, which eventually some form of GDPR type thing will make its way to the US. Eventually, it's only a matter of time because that's really what consumers want. But in the meantime, we've had tons of what we call kind of platform privacy changes. So I mentioned mail privacy protection and link tracking protection from Apple. Obviously, app tracking transparency on the app side for Apple. The end of third-party cookies, like kind of everywhere you look, privacy is getting tighter on the platform side. So the big, the the Googles, the Apples, the Microsofts, all of them are tightening things up and making it more difficult for marketers, for sure. So that's the greater, like, that's that context is making people start to really kind of, I think, question personalization. But in survey after survey after survey, if you ask consumers, do they want more privacy? They say absolutely yes. They raise their hand, wave their hand around. Yes, I would like more privacy. And if in the very next breath you ask them, would they like more relevant messages from brands? Would they like more relevant ads from brands? Their hand goes right back up. So I think marketers see, you know, personalization, and I sort of like small p personalization, so like personalization, segmentation, automation, all of that. They see that as being on the opposite side of the coin from privacy, and they see it as like, oh, I can't have, both of these things at the same time. Consumers do not see it that way. They absolutely do not. And so I think that puts marketers, in this position where, you know, they can't just like say, it's gotten hard, I'm not going to do it anymore, right? You gotta still find ways to do it, and there are lots of ways that you can do it. Shifting from third-party data to more first and zero-party data. Doing more progressive profiling, preference centers, polls, getting your data in shape. You mentioned data. Data is absolutely still a mess in most organizations. Oftentimes it's sort of a mix. Sometimes they have the data and it's just scattered everywhere and disconnected, and you can't activate it in anything remotely close to real time. Or it's in conflict. They have all these data in different places, and the data's in conflict, so it's not clean. And I think people are really waking up to how big of a problem that is. Consumers have been omni-channel for years and years and years and years, and brands are really lagging. We are not doing the best job at delivering the kinds of experiences that today's consumers expect from us. They expect when they do something in the SMS channel that communications in the email channel are going to acknowledge that activity, or if they do something on the app or do something on the web, they expect the brand to know. And too often brands are still operating, on sort of the channel basis. Like, they're managing channels, and consumers don't care about channels. They care about brand. They see it all as the same thing. And so brands are really struggling to kind of catch up to that. And I think things like customer data platforms are like that kind of foundational big step. Whether it's an actual CDP or something sort of CDP adjacent, choose your acronym, whatever you want. But the goal is all the same, right? The goal is to get all that data in one spot, clean it up, and to be able to activate it in something very close to real time, since consumers constantly shift between channels very fluidly. We did some research a while back, and I think this research was from 2019, where we did some research, and it showed that in the early 2000s, most consumer interactions involved at most two channels. And as of, again, I think it was 2019 when we did this research, it was up to almost 6, which means it's probably even higher now. That's a dramatic change, right? From maybe 2 channels to 6. And most organizations are not in a position to be able to handle that. Not from an activation standpoint, not from a measurement standpoint. The attribution models, I think, are still a big mess. So, you're absolutely right that the data side of things, which is absolutely foundational to not only omnichannel, but generative AI, which everybody's talking about, people are going to have to get their house in order if they really want to move forward in a significant way there.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think the channel thing is also interesting in the sense of, I was talking about right tool for the job. Not every channel is born equal. Not every channel does the same thing as everything else. So SMS versus push is a much more intrusive. It's about, okay, do it now, do it now, do it now. Whereas email has obviously a slightly longer tail, and you can start to play around with all those things. So
absolutely. I love email marketing. I've written 5 books on email marketing. I love email marketing.
That's love. Yeah.
Yeah, so but it is not the right tool for every job, not by a long shot. And so yeah, no, we certainly talk. We care a lot about omni-channel. Here at Oracle Digital Experience Agency, and it's about using the channels in the way that really work to their strengths, right? And you mentioned SMS and push, fantastic channels for you know buy online, pick up in store, curbside pickup. You have a service agent arriving at your house imminently, or your package just arrived and needs a signature or something, like things that have to happen right now that you need to know about. Like email is not the right job for that, but SMS and push, those are fantastic for that. But you're right, there's very different expectations around content and certainly around frequency. You're right. In email, we can get away with some pretty high frequencies, way higher frequencies than you could have in SMS or push, because those channels are so interruptive, so interruptive.
I do think on email sometimes clients, some of my clients certainly underestimate. Like we could send more than they think we can, in the sense of like that repetition. People aren't going to open every email. People aren't going to look at everything. So actually, volume is not necessarily a bad thing from an email perspective. Coming back to that point of you're talking about customers' expectations and all that kind of stuff, and a lot of the clients that I work with, and if the same with you, talk the talk around. We want to increase relevance. We want to remove irrelevance. We want to be more personalized and all those kind of things. When you start to get into the practicality of how, and it starts to get complicated, and it starts to get into data and multiple variants of creative and all that kind of, and the associated cost that goes along with that. How do you kind of get across this idea of, like, to me, if something is simple to the customer, it's entirely possible it's going to be kind of complicated at the back end if you want it to be personalized and relevant, all that kind of stuff. How do you kind of take your clients on that journey that actually it is worth investing in this? Yes, customers want it, but how do you spin that yarn, for want of a better way of putting it?
Yeah, again, I think the main thing to recognize that it really, again, is this slider, right? Like,
Yep.
Every campaign doesn't have to be incredibly personalized. There's not only, a spectrum for, when you do use it, but like the campaign mix. It's not like every single campaign has to be deeply personalized. But certainly, a lot of our clients are looking for ways to like weave in, more personalized content. And again, it's not, again, small p personalization. So, using, more segmented messages, more automation. Automation is just amazing. Triggered campaigns, are just gold, right? And those are always incredibly like big P personalized. Like, so those are magical, magical campaigns. I did some research a few years ago, and somewhere in the neighborhood of like 15% of brands generate the majority of their email marketing revenue from automated and triggered campaigns. I think that's amazing. I think also because that's probably less than 5% of their email volume is generating the majority of their email marketing revenue. That's amazing in terms of like relevant communications and really making use of like those moments that really matter, like really dialing into that. And I think that's something that like every brand should be at least trying to achieve. So there's lots of opportunity there for sure. But to back it up, there really is like this range of things that you can do, and some of them are quite simple. Sending more segmented campaigns, using personalization that's across just like your main personas. That can be really valuable. You're right. There is sort of like, this kind of long tail of like personalization where you get sort of diminishing returns. Like, someone once said, I can't remember who it was, but like, it's hard to say what the right number of segments is, but the wrong number of segments is one. That's
Yeah.
not the right answer. But like, is it 3? Is it 5? Is it 10? Is it 20? So like you can do like some kind of like manual types of segmentation that like if you're segmenting the right things, that can really move the needle. And then you can do kind of more complicated data driven things like product and content recommendations where you have machine learning engines that are doing the heavy lifting there. And obviously AI in general is a huge thing right now. I think it's a little bit like kind of confusing a little bit right now with all the talk about generative AI. I've seen a lot of people talking about Gen AI in the same breath as machine learning. I consider these to be just like not only like not the same animal, but like not in the same zoo. Like these are just so
Yeah.
different creatures. But so many articles and so many people I've seen like sort of mixing them together. They have incredibly different value propositions. But a lot of our clients are very eager to use machine learning to do product and content recommendations, especially like our media companies and our retail clients. Any company that has a lot of SKUs or a lot of different items in their libraries, like really machine learning is the way to do that, and that takes obviously some upfront work to make sure that you can activate that. But then once you do that work, that's really just magical stuff that really moves the needle in a big time way. So again, there's this really big spectrum of stuff that you can do that's kind of manual, where you kind of keep things simple and you go for like the big variations. And then there's more complicated stuff where you really mind the long tail, but you need technology to do that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think that your metaphor, analogy, whatever the right word is, of a slider, I think is a really good one. I think for some campaigns, the 1% incremental personalization is not worth the effort for some campaigns, and I think it's an interesting point where you start to go, okay, am I disappearing into my own arse, for want of a better way of putting this? Am I disappearing into a cul-de-sac of data here that I don't need to go into? But
Yeah.
it also brings back an interesting conversation around. It'd be interesting your view on it. I'm a believer to a degree in transparency in CRM in general. Like, we are sending you this because X Y Z. Sometimes not necessarily as explicitly as that, but certainly the idea of explaining to you why you got something, because then I think even if you don't want it, you understand at least why we're talking to you about it, and therefore you're more open to future communications at some point. Is that something that you believe in? And if you think it is important, how do you make sure you're not overstepping what I will call the creepy line that you've gone too far? There's the
Yeah.
old classic example. I think it was Target. Was it of identifying
Oh,
somebody who was
yes.
pregnant? Was it Target
Yes.
pregnant
It
before
was
they ended
Target.
up?
Yes.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I referenced that story in my book. That's a good story. So so you're right. I mean, creepiness is a real thing, and and it's a real thing because brands have historically purchased so much third-party data and and second-party data, like data that that they didn't get directly from their customers. So the way I like to think about like the creepiness factor is that it's all about signal strength. So if someone goes to like, especially if they get your email, they click through your email, they go to your website and they put something in their cart and then they abandon it. All right. There's no secret there about how you knew something, like they had abandoned something in the cart. There's no secret there, so you can be very upfront about that. There's nothing weird going on. Like in the same way that like if you were in a store and you saw somebody load up their cart with a bunch of stuff and then just walk away from it, like a store someone in the store, a sales rep might say, are you okay? So you got all that stuff to like, did you have a problem? Did you have questions? I'd like to understand how I might be able to help you, right? So there's no mystery there. So I think in those cases, like you just be very upfront. I think where things get dicey for folks is when the signal strength is not good, right? Like, maybe I click through that email, I go to your website and I look at a pair of shoes, but only briefly. And then I go and I go to the shoe category, and then maybe I look at something else very briefly, and then I go away. Like maybe it's like very, not a strong signal. I think there we start to get into questions about how do you use that information, right? Does that become a segmented message? Does that become a triggered category browse message where it's like, you talk about your shoe selection in a general way, maybe, but like how, so that I think if you were to drill down into the exact items that that person looked at, I think that's where it starts to get very hazy. And then, my experience, I would recommend something that was maybe sort of a mix of personalization and not, so like have, talk about shoes and maybe have, one or both of the shoes that this person looked at, but then have it mixed in with other shoes that are maybe your best sellers or have something maybe in common with, the shoes that that person looked at, but, to like kind of expand that selection. So, and in those cases, I wouldn't mention the like, hey, we saw you were looking at shoes.
No, it's a bit more nudge, nudge, wink, wink. It's a bit more.
Yeah, I think I would. You want to make it seem like good fortune or
Yeah,
like, oh, like,
serendipitous indeed.
yeah, a little bit of kismet. That, oh, and for that reason, I wouldn't trigger it right away either, because that's also very suspicious. Like you might wait a day or two, then send it, because they were clearly just doing some light browsing or whatever, and then you're following up on that interest. And if they engage with that email, that's a stronger signal that like, hey, maybe they really are looking at something there. So I think brands often misread or miscalibrate that signal strength, and especially if they're really striving to like hit sales numbers or what have you, like they can start to kind of
Yeah,
hypnotize themselves into thinking that like every little bit of signal intent is, let's act on that. We got to jump
yeah,
on that in a big way, and like we got to explore that. Like sometimes you don't need to. Sometimes like backing off is the smart strategy, and like really just pay attention to that. And or maybe there's other ways you can use that lighter signal, that softer signal, somewhere else. So like maybe in one of your usual email marketing campaigns, assuming this person is a subscriber, like we've been talking about,
yeah.
like, as a secondary message block, you have something about shoes and include, one or both of those shoes
Yes.
along with some other shoes, and
Yeah.
that way you're not sending a dedicated email, you're folding it into your existing messaging stream. Like you can be more subtle.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think the other element is a type of, you can have a strong signal that you still shouldn't act on. So I did some work on a bank, and they were very keen on identifying life moments.
Mm.
So first job, having a child for the first time,
Hmm.
that even things like divorce, death of a loved one, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Saying to somebody, we're trawling through your credit card records, and we know well, that's a strong signal, but you still don't want to. Certain point where it's like that's getting a bit creepy, but I completely agree with you on signal strength. I think it's a really good point.
Yeah, definitely. Some things people are more
Yeah,
sensitive about than others. You mentioned the
absolutely.
Target story about pregnancy. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
some
Common
things.
sense should say,
Yeah, some things are way more private than other things.
yeah,
So yeah, we got to like use a little bit of common sense to make sure that we're
agreed.
not going too far.
Yeah, I would agree. And it's interesting we talk about personalization and its impact and selling it in to people, in terms of a client. I always think one of the great get out of jail free cards for any sort of CRM or digital marketing practitioner is, we should probably test that. It's one of those kind of great get out of jail free cards, but it is also testing is such an important part of identifying the right message, the right mix, the right channel, all those kind of various components. I know it's something that you're a big proponent of. So, kind of thinking back in your career, what's the kind of pitfalls to avoid if you want to embrace testing? What are some of the biggest mistakes you've seen? And kind of, I guess, to the contrary of that, who have you seen who's done it really well? And what marks a really strong testing program from your perspective?
Sure. So yeah, first of all, testing I feel like is like really important to listening. Right? There's a little bit of like a debate that I think is a non-debate about like whether or not email is like a two-way communication
Mm,
vehicle. And I feel like if it's not, you're doing something wrong. And it's not like, they're going to be replying to your emails and you'll be replying to them. It's not that, but like you should be, looking at your analytics and seeing how people are responding, in general to the things that you're doing. And then in this age, obviously on a more individual basis, like, what signals are they sending? Does that mean I need to change personalization, segmentation, automation to address them in a way that's appropriate. So I feel very strongly that this is a listen and respond channel, and testing is part of that. So we recently published this checklist of 170 different attributes that brands could use to create more segmented and personalized campaigns. And those included like demographic, firmographic, technographic, geographic, psychographic, behavioral, all kinds of attributes. So like all the icks. We got all the icks
Yeah, all
there.
the graphics.
Yes. We got all of them in there. And if you want to check that out, you can go to go.oracle.com/marketing-checklist, and you can check that out. Now, again, more than 170 different attributes. Now, are all of those attributes going to be effective for your brand? Absolutely not. Are the majority of them going to be effective for your brand? Probably not. But some of them are really going to move the needle for you. And some of that will just sort of make sense. And some of them you'll have to sort of test to discover whether or not this is an attribute, that used the right way is going to move the needle. And so, you need to explore. You should be experimenting. But in terms of, so the number one error with testing is that brands don't do enough of it. So that's number one. But in terms of actually, execution of tests, some common errors I think are not reaching statistical significance. A lot of smaller brands, smaller senders have this issue, and with them, like they're probably not going to be able to test like folks that have much larger lists. And the way that they need to test is they need to test broader themes. Things that you can replicate across different campaigns, and then you use that theme, that strategy, whatever it is, whether it's CTA placement or some kind of tone of voice or whatever it might be, something you could replicate across campaigns. You do that across multiple campaigns. You test it to see what people respond to, and you use the power of doing it over multiple campaigns to get to statistical significance. So that's one. Not retesting is another one.
Oh, don't.
Yeah, so the novelty effect is real. When people see something, especially something really different, it catches their eye and it moves the needle. If you just test things once and you're like, wow, look at that response, and then you never look at it again, chances are you've been snookered by the novelty effect, and you probably saw, without looking, you saw your results start to like revert to norm. So you got to retest to confirm. And then I think sort of probably my biggest bugaboo around testing is using the wrong victory metric. And in email marketing, I see this all the time. And the one I'm always harping on is subject line testing. There's this thinking that the subject line's job is to get people to open the email. And that is not the job of a subject line. The subject line's job is to get the right people to open the email. And the right people are those people who are going to be predisposed to take action based on the body content. You need alignment. Critical. Absolutely critical. And if you are testing your subject lines with the open rate as your victory metric, you lose all alignment most of the time. You really should be testing for clicks, or if you have the power, conversions. You probably want someone to convert. That's probably the goal of your campaign. So you need to go farther down the funnel. That's how you can make sure that your subject line is aligned with your body content and that you're getting the right people to open that message, and see it.
Yeah. It's an interesting point. You 170, I think you said, potential things you could play around with. Mm-hmm. When I think about prioritizing tests, there's a part of me that thinks people jump to quote unquote the easy stuff first. Like where's the CTA sit? Where does whereas they maybe think the audience, the offer, the message, some of the, I would personally think, slightly grander things before you get to that level of fine tuning. How do you decide, or how do you work with them in terms of what's the right place to start? with a test program? Where should we begin, so that we're really moving the dial and then move into fine tuning versus vice versa kind of thing?
Sure. I mean, it's probably fair to recognize that like most people aren't starting from scratch. Like
Mm-hmm.
you've got some history. So I think trying to look back at what you've tested in the past is really key. Like if you're trying to like reboot a testing program. Now you might be asking like, how could you do that? And there, like, you need to make sure that you're keeping a log of tests. And a lot of brands don't do that or don't do that well. But that's really critical to, what's your hypothesis? What did you actually test? When was it tested? What were the results? And then what did you do with the results of that? And maybe it was inconclusive. A lot of tests are inconclusive, and that's fine. Or you learn that thing that you thought was going to improve things actually didn't, and that's super great learning as well, right? Like what to avoid doing. That's super valuable. So keeping a log is really critical. And that way allows you to retest and things. Again, very critical to retest. But I mean, I think you need to figure out like again, I think it all starts with that sort of hypothesis and like why are you wanting to run a test in the first place? Are you trying to test to learn? Are you like trying to learn something you can use across lots of campaigns, or are you doing what we call like a test to win? So like if you're sending out like a Black Friday campaign or a Cyber Monday campaign, if you're doing some testing around that, you're probably not trying to test to learn. You're not trying to learn like some great thing about Black Friday or Cyber Monday campaigns. You're trying to like figure out on this day, how can I increase my results? You're probably doing like a 10-10-80 split, where you do 10% of your audience gets A, 10% gets B, and then 80% gets the winner. It's all about doing better with that one campaign. It's like testing to win. So like understanding, what you're trying to achieve, and what your hypothesis, like those are really clear things. That helps you to avoid doing ad hoc testing, which generally is not good. What you talked about, like how do you prioritize? Well, it all starts with like having a plan and thinking in a big way about what it is that you want to achieve. And sometimes tests can be small. Sometimes tests can be very simple. Button sizes, button language, button color. Amazon is like famously tested like its button colors to like some nth degree, just the right shade. Like that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but you don't want to have everything you do be about that. I mean, you absolutely want to be testing like subject lines, preview text, your headlines, hero images, CTAs. I think those are like sort of the golden places to test where you're probably going to get like the most bang for your buck. So I would prioritize those for sure, but you also want to test things that are not in those buckets. You mentioned offers. Yeah, absolutely. Test offers, percentage off, dollar off, different categories, different people. One of the things that I think is kind of amazing is that we try to pay a lot of attention to like full price shoppers, best customers. Like those are like two buckets that have some overlap that are really interesting. Like you want to make sure that you are paying attention to your best customers when you do stuff. And I think in recent times when there's been tons of concern about economic weakness, like paying attention to your full price shopper. Some people don't like to buy discounted things. I think it cheapens it. They think there's something less about it. And some people just don't like that. And that's fine. There's no judgments, right? Like that's just how they are. And that's what they prefer. So why would you push discounts to those people when they've demonstrated that that's not what they're looking for? They want to buy full price things, which in many cases is sort of a different class of items that you're selling to begin with. So, testing offers and for different segments, I think is really powerful because people are weird. I think maybe if you take anything away from like our discussion about testing is that people are weird.
People will do stuff you don't expect.
They make strange decisions and things that you're sure they're going to love, they don't like, and things that you'd be like, they won't like this, they love. Like it's It's really strange. I can tell you, like, I love an A/B test, and I'm probably correct about like 2/3 of the time, which I
Mm,
think is pretty good.
it's pretty good.
That's pretty good. But that means there's a third of the time that even someone like me who sees a lot of tests is wrong. It's like totally wrong. So like your gut is like, even at its best, is going to miss a lot of opportunities. So yeah, I love testing. Testing is a great way to settle disputes. It is a particularly effective way to settle disputes with executives. Executives often ride in on their horses and they have their own ideas about what makes sense and what doesn't. And certainly in the email space, I find that executives always often have very outdated thinking about how the channel works, or very, not even outdated, but just like, they think it works like Outlook on their computer, and that is not how email marketing works. It's way more complicated than that. And so they have like very distorted views of how things work. And so tests are a fantastic way that if executives are persistent, you can do a test to kind of dissuade them of the merits of their idea.
Absolutely. I think the point you made, that you made really lots of really good points there. But the point about what I would call building the playbook, so capturing what you've learned. People leave jobs, they go elsewhere,
Oh
they
yeah.
disappear, and then corporate memory can be very short in that instance.
Oh,
So
for
having
sure.
somewhere that it, like the gospel's handed down through the generations, for want of a less pretentious way of saying that, is, I think, is a really important thing that a lot of brands don't do.
Yeah, and I think it's actually even more valuable than that. So like that alone is a fantastic reason to it. In this day and age, there's even a more compelling reason to do it, which is cross-channel sharing. Email marketers should be sharing their tests with the SMS team, with the push team, with the SEM team, with the SEO team, like, and with the web team. Like, they should be sharing all these tests with all these people. Now, channels are different. We've already acknowledged that, but a really successful test, on a subject line, could definitely inspire an SMS, message, or there's certain kind, a headline test that might be a headline you might want to use on your website or in a social campaign or what have you, like, or at least they would test it in that arena. So, again, we are living in an omni-channel world. Every brand is headed in that direction, and this is like a really low-tech way of being more omni-channel. Share your testing results in one channel, with your other channel operators, and they can glean something from that. They'll either learn what, geez, this really didn't work well, or this really did work well. Like, let's maybe try that, or do our own little spin. Like, because we're channel experts in our channel, like, we'll adapt that in some way, and it'll inspire. And there's tremendous value in that.
I'd agree. And if you're a big multinational company, trying different things that work in other territories, I
Mm.
would add to that. Now, clearly, there's cultural implications there, but I think a lot of the time, if somebody, you made the point about hypothesis, it's worth a look. It's worth a test to see if it works here too, and I think that's really important. Well, look, thank you for all that. That's been amazing. Now, at the end of every interview with guests, we have something called "Everybody Hates Your Brand: Marketing Room 101." So, if you've read 1984, it's a place where you can put things that you would like to be sent into marketing purgatory or business purgatory for all eternity. So you have the right, as a guest on Everybody Hates Your Brand, to nominate that one thing that you would put into the Marketing Room 101. So I ask you now, what is that thing that you would like to see put into Room 101 and the door shut behind it?
It's a shame we can only put one thing in, but but the one thing I would love to banish is is marketers and executives not being able to tell the difference between a cost and an investment. And we see this all the time in the email marketing channel. Lots of cost obsession with a channel that has, in general, a really high ROI. And there's tons and tons of cost sensitivity, which just racks my brain. And years and years ago, I ran into the email marketer from Zales, and we were both like speaking on a panel at a conference. and we were chit-chatting, ahead of the talk, and she told me about how, again, this is probably like a decade ago. The story really sticks with me. So at the time, their email marketing program was fairly nascent, and they were trying, like, she had been arguing for setting up a triggered campaign that was triggered around wedding anniversaries. So it was a wedding anniversary triggered email campaign that when, their customers, their subscribers would tell them when their wedding anniversary was, they would send out a triggered campaign, to inspire anniversary gifts. Now, I'm sure to everyone listening, this seems like really like a no-brainer kind of thing. But obviously, spinning up this program had costs attached to it. And this poor woman just like was fighting the good fight to and it took, like, I forget how long it was, but it was way too long for her to finally win the fight to get the executives to agree to fund this activity to build this triggered email program, which, when it was finally launched, paid for itself in 6 weeks. And that was like, probably a V1, right? Not a terribly sophisticated triggered program. It was probably an MVP, and it paid for itself in 6 weeks. That's the stuff that really just like cooks my brain. That, like, you were so focused on how much it cost that you lost out on months and months and months and months of revenue. Like, you lost all of that opportunity. That stalling had such a high opportunity cost for something that seemed, again, I think really reasonable. So I think that's one of the things that I'd like to send to purgatory is people not understanding the difference between whether something is truly a cost or whether or not it's an investment that's going to yield some big return.
I would agree with that, and that absolutely can go into Room 101. I would amplify that up to a degree to marketing in general. I think is too often seen as a cost line and not an investment line.
Absolutely.
When you start to read all the work on marketing effectiveness that's happening, and there's an interesting lesson there about marketers and finance people getting together more often and having more conversations about that sort of stuff. So that's absolutely going in. Well, look, thank you so much for spending the time to come and have a chat with us today. It's been hugely educational and really entertaining. So thank you very much for spending the time.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks again to Chad for coming on the podcast. A fantastic interview and some great perspectives from him there. I have put quite a few things in the show notes. First of all, the link to the Oracle Digital Experience Agency. Secondly, the link to his Email Marketing Rules blog, which is definitely worth a read, as is his book, Email Marketing Rules, which is currently on its 4th edition. And finally, he mentioned in the interview the segmentation and personalization ideas to explore. That checklist is also listed in the podcast notes. I've also put links to his social handles and social accounts. Always worth follow, some really fascinating stuff coming out there with real regularity and consistency. So that wraps up another podcast. Thank you for listening, and please remember to subscribe if you enjoyed it. And as ever, as my mum always says, take great care and be vigilant out there.